All right, here is our video for this week. We are continuing with Trig with SOHCAHTOA, and now we are doing what's called inverse trig. So our first problem here, we have theta, 4, and 5. So theta is down here in the bottom corner. That would mean that 4 is the adjacent, and that 5 is the opposite. The longest side here across from the 90 would be the hypotenuse. But because there's nothing on that side, there's no x, there's no numbers, we're not going to worry about that side. We don't need that side. So now what's different about this problem than what we saw last week is that we're trying to find the angle. We're trying to find theta. We're still going to set it up the exact same way, though. We're going to use SOHCAHTOA to decide, do we want sine, cosine, or tangent? So we have O and A. Looking up at SOHCAHTOA, where do we see O and A next to each other? Well, that's right here, so we're going to use tangent. So our problem is tangent, and then here in the parentheses, this is where the angle goes. I don't know the angle, so I'm just going to put theta equals opposite over adjacent. So 5 is opposite and 4 is adjacent. All right, so this time I know the whole fraction. I'm looking for the angle. So to get rid of tangent, we need to use something called inverse tangent. So take a look at your calculator or open up the Desmos link if you're using the Desmos calculator I shared. And we want the tan -1 button. So to get rid of tan, I'm going to use inverse tan. Tan to the -1. That's called inverse tan. So these two things are opposites. Those two things cancel each other out. But just like everything else I do, if I do inverse tan on one side, well, I need to do inverse tan on this other side. And inverse tan always comes in front of the angle or the fraction. So I am going to kind of squeeze it in here, inverse tan. So now, right here, theta is the only thing left. And now on this side, we have inverse tan of 5/4. So we're going to type that in the calculator. And actually, I am just going to pull up our Desmos calculator here. Desmos Scientific. And that's the one we want. So we have sine, cosine, tangent here. If we hit this function button, FUNC, now we see the sine -1, cosine -1, tan -1. Those are the inverse of those. So I'm going to do inverse tan, and then I want my numbers back, so I'm going to go to main of 5 divided by 4. And then there's my answer, 51.34. All right. So theta equals 51.34. If you're using a regular calculator, you'll see that the inverse tan button is right above the tan button. So you'll just have to put second tan and then type in the 5/4. Don't forget to close the parenthesis. All right, that is the first problem. So problem number 2. So now here's my theta. That means 3 is the adjacent and 7 is the hypotenuse. That's an ugly H. So let's decide SOHCAHTOA. Where do I see H and A next to each other? So OH, AH, right here, I'm going to use cosine. So cosine theta. So A comes first, so A is on the top. H was on the bottom, so 7's on the bottom. I'm actually just going to move this over because I'm going to need a little space in front of it. And then I want to get rid of cosine. I want theta to be by itself. So the opposite of cosine is inverse cosine. That makes all this cancel out.
That was a big factor. We were looking at the Nespresso.
If I do that on one side, I need to do it on the other side. So I get theta equals inverse cosine of 3 divided by 7. All right, let's type that in the calculator. So remember, we had to go to function, inverse cosine, back to main, 3 divided by 7. I do think it's important to close that parenthesis. Ooh, a little weird looking though. You can use the over arrows to get where you need to go to close the parenthesis. And our answer is 64.6. So theta equals 64.6. Last one. All right, so 6, this is the hypotenuse, this is the longest side. So 5 must be the opposite because it's all the way across from theta, so that has to be opposite. SOHCAHTOA, where do I see H and O next to each other? Well, right here at the beginning, OH. So sine of theta equals opposite over hypotenuse, so 5 over 6. To get rid of sine, I use sine inverse. If I do that on one side, I need to do it on the other side. These are gone. I'm left with theta equals sine inverse of 5 over 6. So let's type that in the calculator. So function sine inverse, back to main, 5 over 6. Use the arrow here to get over, close parenthesis, enter. So 56.4. Theta equals 56.4. All right, there is our video on inverse trigonometry.